Mr. Q, what was your success or failure rate whenever you had to improvise or drift from established protocols? I don't think we ever tracked that. I'm not even sure how I would guess at it. In the improvisation, I guess there's a lot of ways to look at it. Like when you have formal protocols that follow law on, say, how you have to collect information or report the information, how you have to interrogate, you don't really drift from that. You have some freedom to be creative, especially when you're interrogating. Creative in a completely sane and legal way, nothing crazy. But there were times that you would have to drift from things. I would say, really, it's a lot like what you might see in the movies, or like the old saying goes, failure to plan is planning for failure. There's no such thing as a perfect plan. Things are going to go wrong. That happens. It depends on really how you react to it at the time. I didn't have to deal with too much of that when I worked in Intel. I did when I was in combat arms and I did missions with an infantry unit and a special forces team. That was, I would say, a constant. The Intel world is very structured, military and civilian. They're very regimented and follow the lines because it's governed so much by laws, international laws, as well as our own laws. Then the military, you got your military regulations. By memory, I think the failure rate was relatively low. And I don't think it was anything we couldn't recover from. There was times, I've talked before, that years ago, I used to do, for those that are new, I used to do a lot of YouTube shows. You can watch the old ones. The video ain't that great, but there's some good info there. We used to do an interrogation approach called Mutt and Jeff. It's similar to Good Cop, Bad Cop. It's very similar. But what we would do is Mutt would be like your bad cop and Jeff's your friend. We would establish two interrogators that appeared to be Mutt and Jeff. And what would happen is when we turned it on, we'd actually turn the tables, and who you thought was your buddy would become Mutt, so we could drive you to who you thought was the bad guy. And we're driving you to the person we believe is going to be most effective in getting you that information. During one of these interrogations, an interrogator, a female interrogator, flipped the table over. It landed perfectly on its surface. The legs closed, and it slid forward a few inches very slow and may have tapped the toe of the individual. On video, we couldn't even tell if it hit him. And then there was several seconds delay, and then they started acting like we'd broke their foot, and they were claiming they broke their foot. The problem is with that is that's going along the lines of abuse. The second that happens, you have to stop what you're doing. We had to stop the interrogation. We had to pull them out of there. We had to suspend the interrogator until there was an investigation. We had to send the detainee to medical. Then we put the detainee, into a holding cell, hoping this investigation would get over so that we could talk to her, because in my facility, we couldn't keep him forever. We could only keep him for 3 weeks. And we were close to a couple weeks in at this point. And that was an improvisation, was flipping the table, which was completely fine. But then it caused a situation that you could consider a failure. We set up the Mutt and Jeff, but never actually got to do it. The Mutt and Jeff lasted about 30 seconds. 30 seconds of aggressive talk and a table flipping, and it was over. And from that situation, we actually didn't get to talk to that person much anymore, and ended up sending her away, and it caused a bunch of other problems. So that was kind of how that played out. You've talked to suspects, I imagine, as a law enforcement officer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we had a whole show where we're wrapped around the idea of what interrogation versus interview, or at least we touched base on one particular show. One's more friendly than the other. It's basically about the same thing. I guess interrogation, I always go back to the idea of what was coined as the Reed technique, which was brought into place, I believe, by John Reed, who's a psychologist and a polygraph expert, if I recall correctly. And it's basically like 3 different phases to that. And so you're looking at the character of the individual, and then you're looking at basically the interview portion, and then there's the kind of the accusation phase. You know what I mean? Where basically you're telling the person that they did it. But that led to a lot of false convictions and so on. So there's certainly better ways of doing it, and I think that the British way of doing things, basically, it's a lot more of the Jeff opposed to the Mutt, and where you're trying to build a rapport So I found a lot more success with that. Also letting them know a bit of the information. Well, this is what I have, right? There is some things you can lead an individual to as well. Something simple as a simple technique that's worked quite well for me back in the day when, you know, VHS tapes was certainly a big deal. You just come into the room, you put a VHS tape down on the table, right? And you just sit there. You don't really say much, right? And it makes the person uncomfortable. They'll start looking at the tape and look at the tape and look at the tape. You know what I mean? And then maybe you can ask them simple questions and you can leave. You can do this over, you know, maybe even an hour or something like that, depending certainly on what you're looking at and how long you can hold the individual. So, and again, it can depend on the individual too, right? Your line of questioning and how you go about that. You can build walls pretty quickly, and we talked a little bit about that. Certainly, it's each individual certainly has it, and you have to read that. So through body language or whatever the case may be, you're going to be able to get that baseline from that individual to find out what's going to work best. And if you've got, you know, a few different people that you can work with, Jeff may work, you know, and that might be what you need for that individual, especially if you already got a good baseline or even a previous knowledge of that individual. Maybe you dealt with them before. Maybe there's already some information on an individual, right? Somebody else has already done an interrogation on them, or you've already got a jacket on them, and you can read over that to get a profile on them. So, and like I said, depending on what the crime is, so, or how much evidence you have or you do not have. So there's different strategies you're going to go into that with. And I'm assuming it's quite the same when you're talking about military and interrogation. So I don't have that, right? So, but I would assume there's a lot of similarities, but there's probably a lot of differences. Some things you're looking for, some things you're just looking for information, not necessarily to get a confession, right? And in that case, you're looking at it, maybe you're interviewing a witness. So you're trying to get reliable information that's going to be consistent all the way through to the courtroom, right? And that's what you're actually looking for. You're not looking for a confession per se, right? And so there's really no fight there. So like I said, it's relevant to what you're actually dealing with and what you're trying to obtain, and making sure that that's reliable information. Because if it's not reliable, like I said, you can get a false confession, or you can get information where your witness misremembers, you know, like I said, and you don't want to lead either. So, like I said, this is where the read technique can certainly, that's REID, can certainly come up with some flaws. And so there's a lot of police departments certainly that use that still in the United States, primarily in Canada. We've kind of gotten away from that. And there's really good reason for that. For instance, one particular case was a murder case, and if I recall, I can't remember too much about it, but they ended up paying $500,000 to the individual because he didn't do it. So,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why wasn't I that guy?
Yeah, right. Well, we know there's a lot of innocent people still in jail to this day, and it's probably going to happen tomorrow too. And that's kind of the downside. This is why if you're going to be an interrogator or an interviewer, you want to be the best at what you do and strive to be the best. It's going to save you a lot of pain and headache and heartache later on, not just for you, but your organization and certainly the individual that you might be trying to get that information from. You look like an idiot when you get in front of a prosecutor or a Crown or whatever the case is. Crown up here in Canada, and certainly just churning down the States, or like I said, prosecution. But yeah, so win and a loss can make the difference.
So for real talk, I think what you're asking here is the vital ones to watch. How you written this, I think you're talking about YouTube. I'd have to go back and look. I honestly haven't looked at what I've done there for quite some time. The very last one I did, though, about 10 months ago with Luke on false flags, is a really good one. It's on information warfare and false flags and psyops. A lot of people like that one. Also on Luke's channel, An Informed State of Mind, AISOM. His last one, we did one based on what he just said. It was a podcast we did on interrogation versus interviewing, intel versus law enforcement. You might find that of use for anybody out there that liked everything you just said. The short version is it's very similar. Intel has zero interest in convictions. In the intel world, people you're bringing in, especially detainees, short of an event happens and you bring, you arrest, it's not an arrest, but you detain 20 people, you got to figure them out. But most of the time you have enough information on the people who get detained that some court system is going to get a conviction. We want more information. Then there's certain laws and things. There's things I could do and intel cops cannot do. And there's things cops can do that intel guys can't do. So I think that's what you're looking for. Hopefully I answered your question. That's the podcast, though. I've been doing that for about a year. You can find it. It's on about 17 different places. It's called Grayman Hiding in Plain Sight. It would depend on what you're interested in, but what you can find there is a lot of stuff on body language detecting deception, building rapport, building intel networks, everyday carry. There's some on that I call espionage in the news. I find an article about spies or espionage or what looks like it and discuss it. There's about 60 podcasts at this point, close to 60. So you can check those out. I try to do one a week, like pretty much do one a week. The goal is actually to do two. But with that new Intel training page, I'm probably going to be able to do one a week for a while, just so that you have that answer. Let's see. Did I miss the discussion of Grayman, or is it set for some time? Well, what exactly are you looking for? I've done shows just on what the Grayman concept is, as well as podcasts. We're talking about everything involved in that. But going off what Luke was just discussing, to go a little farther, this is the one thing that's a trait. It's not a skill. You can learn more about this, but emotional intelligence is the biggest thing you need, especially being a gray man and working in the world of intel. Because the gray man concept comes from human intelligence, from places like the CIA, where they pull a person out of society, train them on all kinds of military and intelligence skills. And then the idea was during World War II at the OSS, they would embed them with military forces or behind enemy lines to work with civilians and gather intel and conduct different types of direct action missions. And then now, while that still can happen, part of it has always been taking some of the best guys and putting them into countries to live there among the populace as normal everyday people. Nobody knows who they are, which is where the gray man idea comes from. But going back to what Luke was saying, the reason this is so important is if you get upset, if you get emotional, pissed off at somebody, and it's not an intentional fake thing, aside from losing control or going the wrong way, one of the things you have difficulty doing is following a baseline. Baseline is a consistent pattern you can count on, and there's ways to establish it. I've done a whole podcast on it, talking about mostly on body language, but also with locations, not just people. An example I use in that podcast is if you go to the grocery store every Wednesday, that's when you go every Wednesday. For whatever reason you go there, assuming you go around the same time, there is an established pattern, a baseline of that grocery store. What parking's like, how many people are there, what's in stock, what's not. Whether you pay attention to it or not, you've got that kind of figured out. But if you go on there Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, your baseline's changed because everybody's going there buying last minute stuff. So the baseline has changed. So you can't count on that normal baseline. If you translate that to identifying a baseline on a person, how they're behaving, how they're speaking, or somebody you know really well, what their attitude is, what their body language is telling you, all these different factors, you get emotionally upset, you won't even notice it anymore. You won't even be capable of following it. Or if they get upset, even if it's not a negative emotion, any emotion they get, they can take control of the situation. They can detract you from what you're trying to do. It makes it more difficult to steer them back to whatever you want them to do. So it's not just what this definition up here says, to perceive, assess, and manage. It's also anticipating. With enough experience, you can anticipate. And many of you have probably done this in relationships with family members or friends. You realize what is happening or about to happen. And if you're able to realize that and anticipate it, you can change or try to curb what's about to happen in order to keep everything either civil or keep it on a target for what you need. Because you can't go out, even just being a gray man, if you're just doing it on the civilian side where you're trying to blend in to your community. You know, you've got cybersecurity knocked out, you've got all your stuff protected. People don't know who you are. They only know what you tell them. You're able to maintain this story. You have all this stuff figured out we've talked about over the years on these shows. The second you get upset and you're not emotionally stable, you will lose track of something you're doing. You will do something wrong. You will make yourself stand out. You'll drive differently, or you'll be driving and not paying attention. How many times have you got in the car when something bad happened, something that upset you, and then you didn't pay attention to things? So many people I know got in car wrecks, fender benders, because their mind was somewhere else. And it was usually connected to an emotion from a situation. Happened to me. I was a security guard in Seattle when I was in college, long before I joined the military. I was an armed guard driving around in a car. Got a call that there was a kid about 7 years old locked into a building that we had keys to for security reasons. I had to get there. Kid was scared, freaking out. Parents couldn't get in, whatever was going on. And they just kept pushing me and pushing me. I had to get there, telling me, don't worry about the speed limits, just go. And I listened to them. I got emotional. I got the adrenaline going, and I took off. And then I was either going onto the freeway or off of the freeway on the curved ramp, and bam, right into the side of it. And it put me in the hospital for the day. So those types of things can happen. So emotional intelligence is really the biggest thing. When it comes to the professional Grayman in the intel world, guys that do human intelligence and counterintelligence, when they go through their security assessments and their interviews and their psych evaluations, two of the biggest things to knock them out. One is they're a security threat, whether they realize it or not. They have the potential or have demonstrated something to make them a security threat. They can't be trusted with that level of classified information. Number two, it will boil down to emotional intelligence. And it'll come from that psych test and that interview, how they handle stress and how they manage those situations. And when I did, I've talked about this before too. When I interviewed and trained people for JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, we trained intel guys. We would do interviews and discuss some of these things with them and put them in stressful situations in the interviews. And depending on how they answered, that could get them kicked out. And we would do some simple things like, you know, do you really believe that we would allow an attack to happen and people to die? Because we need it to be allowed to happen in order to find the bigger fish. And some people had a hard time swallowing that. And if they couldn't digest that information, they'd never get in the program. And even if they BS their way through it, which I doubt ever happened with us, they would get caught when they did their psych eval in their interview. Or we would do little questions. We'd find somebody previously in the interview we'd identified that was very important to them, a mother or their sister, a friend, their dog, very important to them. And like, hey, they're on a train track tied up and the train's coming. And all you got to do is pull the lever. And it's not going to hit that person or the dog or whatever, but it's going to steer into 25 other people you don't know anything about. It could be good people, it could be bad people. And there's plenty of people that would pull that lever. And the people that would pull that lever never got in the program. Because part of the program, when it came down to that, those decisions came down to logic and numbers, which is unfortunate, but there are times you're in a situation where it comes down to numbers. And we had to push their buttons to make them emotionally react as much as we can to make sure they were prepared for the job that they were about to get into. Let's see. Oh, Chris B. Luke, do you know who this is?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I do. And as soon as he said that actually he'd been on with us before, I'm pretty darn sure I know who that Crispy is for sure. Yeah.
Because I really wasn't.
No, I'm familiar. Obviously, Colorado we know quite well.
Let's see. I was looking for another question. I saw this one. I would have to read about what's going on right now. I really can't answer that question. It's not something I've been paying attention to. I pay very little attention to Russia. I really don't care about Russia. Not that this isn't important, but I will have to look into that. So I will look into that and then see if there's an answer I can give that would make sense. And I'll throw it up on the podcast or maybe answer it next time we do a live show.
I'll give you my personal opinion on it. I'm shocked that if he's as big of a problem as people like to say, or certainly different websites like to talk about, where the only person that Putin is scared of, which I don't buy. I'm shocked that he's not dead already. I guess maybe that's it. If he was that big of a problem, I think he would be dead. So maybe he's not that big of a problem. That's the only thing I can say.
That's about all I'd be able to say. I want to look more into it in the history, more detail. I got some general idea.
Yeah, I know who the guy is and what he's up to, and he's in opposition basically for everything that the big government's doing there. But Shamer, I remember your Russian story. Yeah, real talk. I remember it as well. I brought that up actually to him.
The podcast where I talk about the Russians.
Yeah,
the YouTube show. Yeah,
it was. I thought it was quite good myself. I'd kind of like to see that platform brought back, and I told him that a couple of times. Whether that's an easy thing to do or not, but I think me personally, I found it pretty darn interesting. So,
well, for real talk out there too, that might be a good one. There is a pre-recorded one on YouTube I did. It's I might have some words or something. There's no video. I think it's called The Day in the Life of a Spy or Day in the Life of something like that. And it's stories that are from real things as well as training stuff that I just kind of melded together. And I told this story like I get up at 4 a.m. and going through all these things, including dealing with Russians. It might be something you're interested in. It wasn't very popular, but people listened to it, really liked it. And Luke and I have talked about me doing something like that or scripting something along those lines. But going back to this guy, it's no secret Putin kills people. He's a career intel guy. He was a spy. That's what he did. They still kill people. I'm sure we do too. I'm not in the business anymore, so I couldn't tell you for sure, although I wouldn't doubt it. The only issue is if he's really that big of a guy, the only reason he wouldn't kill him is he's too big to kill, too big of a face and a name that would push back on him. I don't think he cares too much about what his own country thinks. I think it's more of the international view on how that kind of plays out. Oh, yeah. You know, sorry, I was looking at the internal and Luke was just showing me. That was the next one I was going to go to. Do you ever come across detainees with mental disorders or altered state of mind apart from religious idealism extremes, or did they still, yeah. There was one for sure that I don't know what the appropriate term is anymore, but we'll say mentally handicapped. Basically, mental development was nowhere near the physical age. So it was like talking to a 10-year-old.
I think it's developmentally delayed. I think is where we're at, to let you know.
Oh, goody. So, well, I don't think this guy was delayed. He was never going beyond that. We had to approach it like talking to a child and what could you get from a child. We tried drawing pictures. What pictures could you draw? Trying to get them to talk about their family or things they saw. Like a child, one benefit was you get a lot more body language and physical reactions of happiness and fear to things. So we brought them like a muffin or something. It was real giddy and excited. Then we talked about the bad guy, and you could tell they were very fearful of him. So we didn't get anything you would call usable, reportable intel, but what we did get was a general sense of we were on the right track, and it helped us, but we didn't keep the kid there long. It wasn't a kid. We just called him a kid. We didn't keep him there long. So I have run into that. The other thing, though, you run into that's even more challenging is levels of education. So you can find people who are super street smart and know how to do all kinds of things. They grew up on a farm, they drive a cab, they know how to do all kinds of things, but they have zero education. They don't understand basic math, basic science, can't read or write. And that can become a huge issue. You know, an example is, like I'll show you. So here's a piece of paper. We'd give them a piece of paper and we'd say, we want you to draw your house. Just draw a picture of your house. And they'd say, okay. So imagine what you would draw for your house. Basic floor plan. And you would get this, a little circle. That's my house. That's the kind of thing we would run into. I think I've talked about this before. We ran into a guy who had a wife. This is in the Middle East, remember. He had a wife who was 12 years old, and she had not gotten pregnant yet. And they believed that if the child was not firstborn, wasn't a male, it was a woman's fault, even though scientifically that doesn't come from the woman. But she hadn't gotten pregnant, haven't given a kid. So she was going to divorce her. I love her, but I hate her. And we had to explain to him the medical science of why she not got pregnant. Like, probably isn't capable because she's 12. And it became a teaching session, but a huge problem. So we ran into stuff like that all the time. What kind of different things? So mental disorder was there. I had one, but it was levels of education was the bigger thing. Really, really got us.
Let me. So on a law enforcement standpoint, a couple of different things. Number one, you've got an accused or a suspect, or you've got a witness. Okay, so I'm going to speak to both. So when you've got an accused or a suspect and you're trying to get a confession or whatever the case is, and you've got a mental disability there of some sort, or a person certainly with they're delayed in some sort, or even schizophrenic, right? So schizophrenia certainly is one of the more complicated ones, because there's maybe paranoia in there, there's trust issue and so on and so forth, making things up, you know what I mean? So they're not reliable. So you've got to pick out the information that matches, that seems probable, and that's it's a real difficult one to fly with. So you've always got that other one where you've got that person who's a witness, and there's a couple of different ones. Number one, witnesses they're unreliable, and it's not necessarily their fault. We're all guilty of this to some degree. There's a couple of different examples you can find out there online. Even they show you this test you can do basically on people. We will naturally want to fill in the blanks. So, and that's another problem. So when you've got somebody with a mental illness or a person who you're getting a witness statement from who may be impaired, so these are all these type of issues that can cause complications, right? And again, that information. So if that's going to be your primary witness and they're intoxicated, it may be a wash. It may be just enough, but by the time they get sober up, they may not actually remember what they remembered when they were actually intoxicated. The other thing is that, again, with schizophrenia or any kind of mental illness, like I said, sometimes they want to fill in the blank. Sometimes they have such a mental illness where you've groomed them in such a sense in the interview that basically you're trying to be the Jeff, and now they think that you've deputized them because you're going to they're going to help you solve a crime. So now in their mind, they're the police officer, and now they want to give you more information than what they even have. So there's a lot of disinformation that can come of those type of people with those disorders, or even if they've got an agenda in their head. So if you're talking about a religious, extreme or anything to that nature, they may have a preconceived notion of the individual that they believe is the accused or the suspect or the guilty party, and they might give more information that's actually what's actually there, readily available, whatever the case is, to try to get that person, convicted at the end of the day. And we get that all the time. Somebody's got an axe to grind, if you would, and even a false statement, period, where one of the biggest ones certainly is a girlfriend-boyfriend. The girlfriend is upset because the boyfriend has messed around on them, and they make a false accusation that there was maybe a sexual assault or something of that nature. And then by the time you get to them, the stand and everything else, they find out that from good cross-examination, the female party's story is falling apart. And this happens more than we like to even think. And I've been involved in two of those, right, where it was quite prolific, So, like I said, it can definitely happen, So there's definitely some challenges with that, and it's whether or not, at the end of the day, whether or not your Crown or your district attorney or prosecution, whoever's going to be basically sitting with this information, is going to say, "Yeah, that's credible. We'll go with it," or "It's no damn good." This is going to get tore apart on the stand. You get back in there for multiple interviews, and the story's changing, and that you're screwed before you start. So.
You mentioned the alcohol and sobering up. It reminded me of a couple of things. It wasn't me. Oh, no. What do we have here? David Robertson. What's up, buddy? David, can you hear us? Try to reach him on the internal. So one of the stories was, I think it's somebody I know. It wasn't me. I might have said it was me in the past, but it wasn't. This guy came in through the situation anyway. He's going to lead us, the good guys, to Bob the terrorist's house, whoever Bob is, and figured out that he knows where the house is because he walks there. He's not going to be able to get in a car and show us, but he knows from his house how to get there. And it was just down the street so far. Anyway, the way it worked out was they put him on essentially a track that we had for running, and they were walking him around the track, and he couldn't figure it out. And they're like, "Well, what do you do differently?" And it was, "Oh, I smoke." So what they did is they gave him cigarettes, and they said, "Okay, here's your front door. I want you to walk to the market and do everything you normally do. If you stop, if you pick something up, you smoke a cigarette, whatever. And so he took off walking. They gave him cigarettes and he started smoking, and he got to a certain point. He goes, right here on that side of the road. They measured it, found the target house, and rolled the dice on it. And it was exactly perfect. The other situation was we had a couple guys come in. This is the first time I interrogated. I was not in intel. Everything I did was technically illegal, but I got away with it because I didn't know any better. Two guys came in. They drank themselves into courage. They were drinking straight Iraqi liquor. And every time they started to sober up or when they ran out of alcohol, they didn't want to keep talking. So we got them more alcohol, and I slowly gave them alcohol to keep a certain amount of inebriation. And through that, we got descriptions, patterns of life, what guys look like, vehicles they drove, places they lived in Mosul. And it was a guy called Mullah Mahdi, who was the emir of Mosul at the time when Zarqawi was in office. Or not in office, he was the main Al-Qaeda guy. And we got him. That description went out within a day. It got distributed across the brigade and all the assets. And it was within a couple of weeks they nailed that guy and smoked him. Done deal. See, Colorado Biker Prepper. Hope you're enjoying the snow. Favorite method for documenting and recording intel in a secure way while observing? Memory. Actually, I try not to. When I was working, I try not to keep any written anything on me at all. So you kind of learn this over time in training, especially when at low levels, when I went through the intel school, we would have to meet people. We'd be allowed to have notes, but sometimes they'd have us not use notes or try to remember stuff just as an exercise. It wasn't graded. But eventually I went to a school that the DIA ran at the time. So when I went through, and that's the Defense Intelligence Agency, when I went through that training course, one of our exercises, we had to meet somebody in town and have a 30-minute conversation with them. So we had to have all of our questions prepared, build rapport, all the stuff you do. It was the first exercise I did that was realistic. And I met him at a coffee shop, and we had a 30-minute conversation, and I had to remember it all. I wasn't allowed to take notes. Then I had to let them leave. I had to leave, make sure they left the area, and I got in my car and I wrote down everything I could remember. And I did really well. I had like 97% of the information, and I think it was like 98% accuracy. So I did really well. So I would actually practice that. So when I would do surveillance, or I did surveillance, the best I could, I wouldn't take notes. There's times where I've taken notes, like, in the movies, they show them doing surveillance or whatever the cops call it, and they write down the time and place of what they're doing. I would do it in codes, simple codes, crypto stuff that would look like nothing. Or I would write down times like it was a day planner, my schedule for the next day. One time I did it, I put down a holiday that was upcoming, and what I made it look like these were the planned events for my family, but I put the times down. And so I see him go into a restaurant at say 3 o'clock. So I put 3 o'clock reservations, and I'd put a restaurant where my family lived. When I saw that, I remember at 3 o'clock, they went into this restaurant. I didn't write down that restaurant's name. So if you saw it, it would look like a schedule. So you got to be creative in those different ways. Other things you can do, you can get the little digital recording devices. I have an app on my phone. When I first started the YouTube channel, that's what I used, was an app on my phone and recorded. You can do that. What's nice about it on your phone is I record stuff all the time when I'm talking to people, not on the phone, but in person. Those things can work. You can take notes. It just depends on what you're surveilling people for, what you're doing. You don't want to look like you're doing anything illegal. You definitely don't want to be doing anything illegal. You don't want to look like you're casing the joint, as they say, like you're sitting outside the bank taking notes because you're trying to figure out if your girlfriend's cheating on you, and then it looks like you're writing down information to go after the bank and somebody reports you. So you got to pay a little attention to your surroundings and what you're doing. Let's see. I assume this is for me. So I quit doing YouTube for a while. It got to the point, Luke quit around the same time too. It got to the point where, gosh, Luke, what did we do? We would do like a Friday night show and then an after chat. That would take 4 or 5 hours total. We do the same thing on Saturday. Then we do a show on Sunday. So Friday through Sunday, we'd probably do 12 hours of this. Not to mention off airs, meaning the show's over, we keep chatting off air. So we might be doing 20 hours of conversations. I got burnt out. And then at the same time, I was training people here in Arizona. I was working on the base here, training guys for JSOC. And I had to give something up, so I gave up YouTube. And then about a year ago, I got back into the podcast, which I mentioned earlier. And that's what I've been doing for the last year. Now I got the training website that I'm trying to develop to see if that can go somewhere. If that works out, I'm actually going to start doing something like David does for Grassfire Industries for Leadership, where I can do personal coaching and training on certain subjects for either intel or communication, those types of things. David, is your mic up and working yet?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
I'm here.
Just checking. I'm scrolling. Okay.
I'm going to go back real quick here just to, you're talking about basically making mental notes or whatever the case is. Myself, if I've got a choice, absolutely every day of the week, it's audio video recording, and it's basically at, head level, like kind of like where we're at right now. If I can get that, this way I can go back and go back and go back. And I think anybody would be a fool not to pick that, right? As far as, being able to recall the information, 100% accuracy. And again, video, I mean, from a standpoint in court, because that's where everything ends up for the most part, providing you've done everything right, and you can admit that as evidence. But I mean, that's the best way all day long, right? Because otherwise, then it's almost he said, she said to some degree. Even though you're certainly the interviewer or you're the officer or whatever the case is, and you're in the good guy chair, you're the professional witness, and so on and so forth. And there's certainly some points for that. But at the end of the day, audio video, it's king every day of the week, right? And we know that either sinks you or it's a win for you. So, but when you're trying to recall information, yeah, it's just easier. Why not?
Oh yeah.
Memory's good, but one of the things that I often teach, one of the things that I often advocate. In fact, it's funny because I give every single one of my students one of the very first things that they get is, and even my promotional materials. That's what's funny about it. Even my promotional materials, it all starts with a little journal, or a little pocket pad or something like that. And to me, I mean, yeah, you could. There's some risk there depending on what it is you're doing. But the thing is, we've all had that awesome idea. We've all had that awesome statement or, whatever. It was in our head at the time. And, we look for something, we don't have it. Or, I don't know. I just think that when it comes to memory, actually putting a paper to pen or a pen to paper, I guess, depending on how good you can do that, is always going to be a benefit.
Got a question from NC, which I'm just going to guess means no crayons, or North Carolina. And this isn't changing the subject. These are the questions we're answering tonight. Go-to techniques for surveillance detection and denial. There are definitely a great many, but what has been the most effective? The most effective anybody can do is called a surveillance detection route. And you can do this on foot and you can do this in a vehicle. Part of the ways I choose where to live is because of the multiple ways I can drive in and out. And I choose to not always take the same path, except for in certain occasions. There's one of the things I do is there are certain things I establish as a pattern of life so they look normal to my neighbors that they can count on. But there's things that I do differently because people always leave at different times for different reasons. Surveillance detection routes, to keep it simple, it's a pre-planned route. Say you're driving, where you can drive for a little while, and whether this goes on for a few minutes or even a few hours, you can make turns. And when you make a series of turns, you want to make at least 3 lefts or 3 rights a couple of times. Part of that so that if somebody turns the same way you turn, that's normal. Twice, if you didn't necessarily notice them, might be coincidence, might not. Third time, they're probably following you. You can do the same thing on foot. And you have these different routes. And then the reason it could go longer is you could put stops in. So I have detection routes in this town that I have built up based on places I would go anyway or have gone. so that I can follow a detection route, and then I can go to, say, a store or a shop of some type, do something normal there, use that as an opportunity to see if somebody's still there. Do they pull in? Do they pull in across the street? Do they get out of the car? They, one of the places I go is a music store, and across the street is a hotel. Do they pull in the hotel where they're looking across at me and never get out of their vehicle? Giving them the opportunity to screw up, to make it more noticeable. Yeah, they're definitely following me. So you can set these routes up to see if people are following you, because most surveillance isn't static. It's going to be mobile when it's pros. It's like when the FBI does it, they don't do it with one vehicle like in the movies. They do it with 3 or 4 easily. They parallel you. They pass people off. Good surveillance is done in teams. There are people that can do it by themselves that are that skilled, but it's very rare anymore. It's done in teams and they pass you off. So it's to identify the amateurs, sometimes the pros. And the reason it can go longer is if you think you're being followed and you do something, or you choose to let them know that you've busted them, or maybe you busted them, then you continue on your route to see if anybody else has picked up your tail, if it's been passed off. If I ever see that and it gets passed off to somebody else, I figure now that there's 2 people involved, they at a minimum know what they're doing, but they may not be pros. Now, personally, I don't have a reason to have the FBI or anybody following me, but surveillance detection routes, I've talked about them before a little bit. You can look those up online. There's classes for them. There's probably a private school that teaches them, but that's a big part of training in any human intelligence and counterintelligence stuff.
Reality is if you've got 3 and 4 people and they're passing you off in the surveillance situation, don't worry about it. You're already in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, there's a reason why they're doing it.
Yeah, that case, doesn't matter if you're up shit's creek. So
yeah, you don't get surveilled like in the movies because they think you have an association with somebody, unless it's like an escaped convict, maybe. But they don't do that. If they do that, they have something on you, and you probably know what it is. There are cases of mistaken identity. One of the podcasts I did was on a guy being concerned about being followed, and we talked about it. And the whole reason was he was shooting some guns at his house where he could legally do it. Cops show up, end up taking his guns, going in his house, taking all of his guns. Then he thought they were surveilling him. Gave me the information. I talked to him, talked a little bit about surveillance detection. Come to find out, he has the same name as somebody else who was a convicted felon. I think he ended up getting his guns back. But they were going to, I don't know why they didn't arrest him if they thought it was that guy, but they took his guns, and then he was positive, him and his girlfriend, they were being followed. And so I don't remember the episode name, but that's a really good one on surveillance detection, some things that you can do.
There was a situation when I guess I was a late teenager. I thought this was really strange. Now, in all fairness, our family wasn't unfamiliar with law enforcement interactions and stuff like that because of one of my brothers. And well, there was a situation. It was a confused situation, and we saw the same car. Well, on both sides of the road, there were cars that just were down the road and they seemed out of place. And down the other side, there were cars that were just sitting there that seemed out of place. And it was interesting because, they were parked there. They were doing their own thing. But then we had done something that was a little bit out of the ordinary. And we were gonna go do something. And it was spur of the moment, very uncommon thing to do. I can't remember what it was, but I remember that we were all getting around like, oh yeah, that'll be fun. Let's go do that. So we get into the car and then we take off, and all of a sudden these cars are just, spinning around, and like one of them accidentally went into a ditch, and, they were scrambling trying to get us. So as I'm thinking about like ways to figure out if you're, being surveilled or if you're being watched or whatever, is, and this kind of piggybacks on something you were saying there a minute ago, Shamer. And you're not talking about stop points, checking it out, turning, whatever. Do something out of the ordinary or something, change direction, be spontaneous sometimes, just to kind of course correct, I guess, do something a little bit different if you are a repetitive type.
And most of us are a repetitive type. I mean, look at the most people, if you're a factory worker, let's just say, right? or whatever the case is, right? If you start at the same time every morning, you go to the same coffee shop, you take the same route, and provided there's not a detour or something of that nature. We get back into that, talking about bug out routes and so on and so forth when we talk about preparedness. But it's the same thing, right? If you get into a habit of taking different routes, right, mixing things up a little bit. Now, some people are conscious about their gas usage, right? So they're trying to keep things like this day and age, of course. You know what I mean? Money is money. But David's absolutely correct. If you can mix it up, it makes it harder to get a baseline on you, first and foremost, which makes it harder to figure out exactly when and where to start a surveillance. Easy if they know where you live or whatever the case is. Easy if they know where you work. And these things you can't necessarily negate. I mean, you can't change where you live. You can't change where you work. But you can change the route. And again, if you change the route and you're seeing the same vehicle after you've changed that route, that's a dead giveaway, right? And why not change up the coffee shop, meet more people? You know what I mean? Maybe not this day of COVID, but I mean, there you go. But it's definitely something that we all do. We all fall into habits. Very easy to get baselines on an individual, and all of us, I would say, take that approach. In some of the neighborhoods we live in, we have no choice but to take this particular one or two routes, because that's the only way to get out of the suburbs to get to the interstate or to get to the your local grocer or your local Walmart, for instance, or the place that you go, like the gym. So if you've got basically a routine, it's easy to pick up on. And this is how somebody who's actually doing, intel work on an individual or just getting information, it's really easy. Social media, man, I mean, you can find somebody who's out there and they update their status almost within the same hour every single day or every single night. Those people like to wear their life on their sleeve. In a law enforcement capacity, you get that and you're looking through and you go, oh, this is a gold mine. You know what I mean? And they just tell you everything. Heck, you go through and you can find out their whole entire family. We certainly, Shamrad talked a bit about that, trying to limit your footprint, you know what I mean, or your printing period online, right? So sheltering your who you are, right? Trying to erase yourself. In the States, from my perspective, and we've talked off air and stuff like that, it's hard in the States, I think, to erase yourself from the internet world. Here in Canada, it's a lot easier. But be mindful to that. Every time you log into something, there's a print there, right? You're easily found. You Google it, and then all of a sudden there it is. You start being able to connect the dots. So,
I want to just say hi to the people. We got like 40 people watching, and I was just thinking about when we did this 10 months ago, we had almost 1,000 people watching. I don't know what I did differently. Maybe I should have just kept it up then. I probably could have built the YouTube channel up. I didn't do it because I was going to move, but I probably should have kept it going. I remember that we had over 900 people.
Because you could have moved, but your channel wouldn't have. Something else, and this is something I think is really important. So there's a couple of things, since we're talking about that, I think kind of piggyback on Luke here. Yeah. Be careful what you put on social media. I've written an article about that. You have got to really be mindful of the things that you put on social media. You announce most people announce way too much on social media, way too much. So there's that. But then there's also other things too, like, I'll give you an example, right? So during the protests or riots or whatever it is you want to call them there in Washington, one of the things that Bank of America was doing basically was sifting through data from customers to try and find people who were doing things, who, maybe traveling, buying certain items prior to and up to inauguration and so on and so forth. So then there's that type of digital footprint. Well, you got to be careful about that. And then, of course, one of the things that I think everybody should have at this point is one of these. Now, I'm going to cover up the logo here, but this is one of those. It's basically a Faraday cage for your phone, right? So you put your phone in, and no signal gets in or out. It doesn't get pinged. That's another way that you can kind of reduce or just keep things not so predictable. So just a thought.
Those are cheap too. You can find them on Amazon. There's tons of companies that have them.
Oh, super cheap, super
Yeah.
cheap.
I've got several of those. You can also get, even if it's not that, you can get very similar products that are like briefcases and bags that are meant to store documents and things that are fireproof, and they're great to have because a lot of people have like safes or gun safes. And while those are great, if you look at the fire ratings on them, if you're not spending thousands of dollars, they typically, even if they're rated for the heat of a house fire, they won't survive a house fire. But you can take those items and put them in those bags that are a second layer of protection. There's people that have had safes destroyed, guns destroyed, whatever, gold melted, but they've had documents inside of these bags, inside of the safe that did survive. So you can definitely check those out too. Now, let's see.
Oh, I'll also say this too. This was interesting. This is really, and this really kind of gives to the point, guys. So I had a student who, like, all of a sudden was having some issues, some domestic issues with a spouse or whatever, and it was really weird because he came back, well, hey, is really intuitive about what we're talking about and seems to, dispute some of this or whatever. It was a weird deal, but it turned out that what was going on was that my student actually had some sort of spy hidden app on the phone that was recording what was being said in class, and not even just in class, but recording her all the time. And the thing that actually, the way we were able to figure that out was because she kept prompting these things that just sounded really fishy to me. And I said, you know what, let me do something here real quick. So I took her phone and I put it into the pouch that I was talking about. And then all of a sudden, she started getting the Grand Inquisition when she would go home. Well, what'd you guys talk about? What was this? And da-da-da-da-da. And what was going on. And then that's how we were able to find out that she had a spy app on her phone from her spouse. Yeah.
And either she was doing something wrong or he was, and he was deflecting that back on her.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger metropolitans and stuff like that, you're going to have more likelihood of somebody trying to hijack your phone, right? Too. I mean, so that's certainly the Faraday, phone case there. That'd be more prominent. It's not impossible in a smaller area or whatever the case is, but if you're going into a Starbucks, you know what I mean, and you're getting 100 people going through there, and again, we got COVID, I understand that, but just more likelihood, or going onto a campus or whatever the case is, there is some smart people out there, and you don't even have to be that smart to be able to utilize the apps that are out there or the technology that's out there to be able to hijack your information and steal your information. So that's just it too. So like I said, it's probably something to consider, especially with your credit cards and stuff. I mean, somebody just has to basically walk by you with a scanner, your back pocket, and they can get some of that information, from what I understand anyway.
There is a document, I was just trying to find it, but I think it was about to play the audio, so I stopped it. There's a documentary on Netflix that has to do with that, especially your phone surveillance and what people can do. I'm not sure the name of it, but it's probably in the trending. It's very popular. I haven't seen it. I've heard about it. What I've heard, it's on point. And I guess if it's eye-opening to you, it's definitely something you need to look into, because it means it's not something you're working even happens. I did a podcast called Are You Under Surveillance or something like that talks about that. I even talk about why Pokemon Go was created. It wasn't created as a game. It was created as an advertising platform to get people to go places. But the amount of that stuff that's out there, and people, like Dave was saying, can put those apps on your phone. A lot of them are created for good reasons, for your kids. You don't want your kids getting on places they shouldn't get onto. But it's being aware of what those things are, what the capabilities are. Everybody always focuses on the government. I'm on a list. Am I being surveilled? Blah, 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 blah. If the government wants you, they're going to get you. The capability exists. There's no getting around that. What you should be paying attention to is, if you focus on advertisement, placement, all that kind of stuff that businesses do, through that, you will discover all the other things while you're trying to maintain your privacy that people can use against you or can find on you. Just like Dave was saying, how much information we put out there. Eventually, when I do some how-to videos on the training site, I'm going to be doing ones where I start looking up people. Not myself, probably David or Luker. some innocuous people or some of the volunteers, and shows you all the information I can find. I did it on Facebook on a guy. I put an article up last year. It was about how Chinese espionage guys were using LinkedIn to reach out to people. I thought it was a good article to share. It's something that's been going on forever. And this guy's like, yeah, this is for real. They contact me all the time. And I don't know why. So I looked at his profile, looked up something, and I responded to it. And I mentioned it in a podcast too. Like, here's what I found on you. Here's what you have in here. He took a class in college he mentioned on strategic intelligence. I go, that's why they targeted you. And then I went through and I found pictures of his house, a bunch of stuff. I told him where he lived. And I said, I did all this in 5 minutes. I said, now, granted, I can do this better than the average bear. But if these guys are coming after you and they're pros, imagine what they know about you. You know, and these are bad actors. That's aside from what a stalker can do, or an ex, or a private investigator, the police, whatever. Or just like you always hear about those famous people where they hacked their phones and shared their nude photos. Well, that can be done to anybody. It's because of the information we give them. So, okay, next question here from Rudy. How you doing, Rudy? Been a while. We're the three wise heads. We're gonna run the country one day. 3 bald heads. Is it a good policy? I like it. Should I make this policy in my house to introduce a teen to intelligence work, or could have a massive impact on the way they view life? Yeah, I would do it. Well, here's what I would do. I would
Conversation.
I would have the conversation. I would start with open source intelligence, the idea of some of the stuff I teach, but you can find a lot of this on your own, how to use different tools like the 1 million tweet map. And there's dozens of others I'm eventually going to be doing classes on, how to find information for their own interest, but to make them aware of what can be found out about them. Through that, then you can start looking into understanding biases, especially like cognitive biases, cognitive dissonance, like information biases, normalcy biases, without using them as an example, showing them other people's example of this so they can self-discover, because they're a teenager, brains are developing, hormones, all this. You start pointing them out, they're going to be resistant. Through that process, at a minimum, if it goes well, they'll start making smarter choices about what they choose to put out on the internet. They'll start looking at information more objectively. They'll start seeing things and choosing to even look up one website or Google one thing out of a news report or off of some famous celebrity they're following to find out more information. It could benefit them because during that time in our lives, especially with all the chemical imbalances, where bodies are growing, our brains are being developed, we tend to have stronger reactions to things. Like, I don't remember it that way when I was a teenager, but I guarantee that was real because it's real with everybody else I've seen, so it had to have been with me. So it will help them definitely see the world differently. It'll help them look at politics. Teenagers are great. No matter how you may want them to vote, when they come 18, they can vote. If you start early and having them look at this information, maybe the next time there's an election, especially if it's coming close to when they can start voting, they quit listening to the talking heads in the media. You know, even if they see somebody like me or David, especially David, when he talks about it, intelligent guy, speaks well on it, tells you it's going to be disagreeable sometimes, tells you, like I do, don't listen to me, look stuff up. Maybe then they do it. And then even if their opinion and choices don't change, they're more informed about it. They're more logical. They have more information. You know, if they believe something different than you, at least they can back it up. At least they start learning how to do things on their own, be more self-reliant, at least mentally. And then that can translate to other things in their lives. It's a form of research. If you get them into it that way, then maybe they'll do better in school. Maybe they'll do better when they want to start dating. Eventually, I'm going to do a show or a podcast on, especially made for women, about identifying threats and things about dating and meeting people that have to do with threat assessments, threat IDs, things that have to do with surveillance and how people track you on your phone, all these things, but geared towards women. While it can pertain to men too, it's going to be geared towards women. But imagine if they know all this stuff on their own, how that could affect their life.
And I would add too that, you know, when you have these conversations, no doubt, and especially if you're showing them something, there's a good chance that, you know, they're going to exercise that knowledge maybe sometimes against you to skirt some of, you know, parental oversight or whatever. It's going to happen. but again, it's one of those things where, well, it's sort of like, okay, I had a similar situation when I was getting, so one of my first undergraduate was in security management, and I was floored because I was like, well, they're teaching us this, but statistically speaking, some of the people in this class are not good people, and they're going to use this information in a really bad way. So, you know, some people are going to use it bad. Some people are going to use it for good. But if you have the question, I like, you know, Shamer's statement there. I would add too that it's a lot easier to help teenagers understand the implications of what's going on by asking questions that make them critically reflect upon what it is that's going on. You know, if you tell, here's the thing. This is how psychology works. You tell a teenager not to do something or to do something, they're going to be reluctant to do it. They're going to try and figure it out on their own. But if you ask them a question that leads them to a conclusion about whatever it is that you're talking about, they get a chance to critically reflect upon the topic at hand, chances are they're going to find the logical conclusion. And it's best if they answer with that logical conclusion, because then they own it. The alternative is, of course, that they're going to answer that question with something stupid, and they don't want to sound stupid to the adult. And that's why that works.
True. Look, we're facing it now, opposition, right? I mean, our base government, for instance, there's a left and a right, right? And when you have an argument with somebody, there's opposition. Our whole lives is based on opposition. So the idea basically being one of the key things, and you'd said it there, and so, for instance, my daughter, she'll say something, you know, about a particular topic, and I'm going to put my daughter on the spot for what her ideals are on any particular subject. But one of the things I always say to her is, so why do you believe that, right? Or why do you believe that to be the truth? I said, now go out and chase the opposite. So go out and chase the opposition and find out why they believe that's the truth. Then you're going to get closer to the truth, or at least your truth, okay? You're getting more information. Chase the information. So it's not like just saying, you know, I seen it on the news, therefore it's true, right? Is it the truth? Is it all the information? Is there more information to gather or to obtain to get a better understanding of what it is that you're looking at before you become compassionate about it? It's kind of like voting, you know what I mean? And I don't want to go on a tangent here, but you know, I certainly believe that you have a right to vote, but you have a duty to be informed, right? Before you go and take that right, because you're exercising your right, but you're also kind of pushing that on other people with whatever you decide. So be informed, hence the informed state of mind, right? That wasn't by accident, and that's just it. So I mean, that's part of being a good investigator, and a lot of that stems from even good situational awareness, right? Being situationally aware, or being aware of the world you live in, right? And not just being fed the information. Like if David says it, you know what I mean? If you know David, you can say, you know what, hey, we know that David's a good researcher, right? He's not just going to say something because, you know, he's heard it somewhere. He's actually go out there and validate that information before he actually puts that out there. Number one, it's reputation. Number two, he would like to be sharing good information. Shammer, the same thing. Certainly myself. And the other thing is that nobody wants to be wrong, right? So encourage that with your youngsters. Having them situationally aware is a good starting point, so that we don't have their cell phone sitting in front of them. How many people have already seen that almost walk into traffic, or who have walked into traffic because, you know, they're not being aware of the surroundings. And that'll go back to certainly what Shammer's talking about, you know, an entire podcast. So being aware of your surroundings, being aware of the people that you're interacting with, right? Who's watching you, stuff like that. So, but yeah.
I even do that like very specifically. I'll be like, we'll have conversations about economics or socialism or whatever, you know, but I'll do it in like a really kind of an interesting way. I'll be like, you know what, kiddo, let's say that you had a job, all right? So you're working your butt off, and, you know, your employer said, man, you know what, Heather, I think you did a phenomenal job, but, you know, Thomas over here didn't do that great this week. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of your hours and some of your income. We're going to give it to him. How does that sound? She was like, no, you know, I'm like, okay. And then I let that sit, you know, because, you know, economics, things like inflation and, some of the underpinnings of socialism and some of these things can be hard for somebody to wrap their head around. And so that type of translation through question can really be beneficial. And this is also to the point, in regard to security, it's the same way, helping, for instance, one of the most insecure doors that you have on your house is a sliding door, a sliding glass door. It's ridiculous how unsecure that is unless you do a couple of things. But asking questions in a way that she can conceptualize the result of an action, and that's to Shammer's point, when you're doing that, it's, yes, definitely talk about it, but then ask questions about, well, what if you did this, right? Posting on social media. All right, you're at the bar, you live by yourself, and you post on your social media, hey, I'm at the bar with the girls. What does that do? What does that do to people who know you and your habits and your behaviors? What kind of opportunities does that create? Or, hey, I'm on vacation with the girls. I'm, in the Bahamas. People who know where you live, what does that do? What does that tell them? Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I was just going to let everybody know there's a lot of good questions out there, and I'm not going to be able to answer all of them. So what I'm trying to do is find ones I'm copying and saving them to answer later on a podcast or wherever I answer them. Let's see. Oh, look at that. I changed a life. I increased your situational awareness. Glad to hear it. My mom actually is, she isn't doing it because of the virus right now. She's planning to take a trip with some friends to Switzerland or somewhere in Europe. And she had a bunch of questions for me. I actually created a podcast around it, talking about things to do when you're traveling, what to look for, hotels and shopping and using money and all these kinds of things. It really helped her out. She liked it. Hopefully she listens to it again before she takes her trip. Let's see, here we go. Camouflage is always a popular question. I think I've been asked that many times. Can you discuss camouflage and its application in urban scenarios? My thinking is it's useless unless you're trying to imitate the looks of existing agencies operating in your area. They do roll around in camouflage sometimes. So you're speaking of camouflage patterns. I speak of camouflage as things that camouflage you. So, well, I wear camouflage on occasion, especially when it's normal around here. Looking at patterns, yeah, it can be useless. I mean, it just depends. There's times of the year in certain states where you can wear camouflage 24/7 and nobody will look at it any differently because there's so many hunters, or you go to a gun show, a lot of guys wear camouflage. I swear they break it out like it's a party dress just to go to a gun show. It just depends. Like, I know guys that say in their vehicles, following along the lines of, say, a bug out concept, or they have to leave their vehicle for some reason, carry camouflage clothing as a backup set of clothing, depending on where they're at, because it might make more sense for them. Or they have coveralls, like flight suits that aviators use. Generally speaking, it's clothing. Do you stand out? Do you care if you stand out? I purposely stand out sometimes. There's people that I used to talk about, when guys talked about the Grayman concept, they only focus on your appearance, which I always tell people is about 5% of it. Your appearance is only good for a few seconds. But they said, well, you can't wear neon colors and be a Grayman. Well, yes, you can, if that's the environment you're in. You could dress like a clown and be a Grayman if you're at the circus. So some situations, your appearance might matter. There's appearances that have unique situations they would work in. But yeah, generally, especially into the Grayman idea, it's probably useless, but that doesn't mean you can't wear it. But I keep stuff in my car. Sometimes it's camouflage when I travel. It depends on what it is. Just like I always have a pair of boots in my car because I wear like Crocs all the time out here in Arizona in the summer. So if my car breaks down on the side of the road, I don't want to walk to a gas station in Crocs. So I have boots that I can wear. But yeah, I would agree it's generally useless. Double B, how you doing?
Real Talk. I was just curious if someone can find out the real name based off the YouTube handle. Real Talk, I just sent you a personal message there. It's all your personal information, driver's license information, your insurance information. So hopefully that answers your question.
It's not hard. I'll eventually do some how-tos on that, on how to identify people on different websites like LinkedIn, social media, their emails. When I was training guys down here for militias and prepper organizations, I used to do the background checks. We had a formal background check system, but I started out in one of the organizations by doing background checks. They would always say like who they were. They would just give their information. It was needed, real name, phone number. I would give them the history of their phone numbers, social media accounts. I'd look at things like Facebook, Twitter, hear their interests, hear what they comment on, kind of a profile for whoever was going to interview them. It's not difficult. It's having somebody show you how to do it. This is, I think, the best comment of the night award. If we had an Oscar for the best Grayman comment, this would be it. I was laughing earlier when I saw it. I did that look. Apparently, they don't like where my head's at. There are online classes for things like surveillance detection. I've found a couple. I don't remember where they are. Typically, those are not done online. They're typically done in person. You actually go through the exercise of surveillance detection. I actually saw a class, I think it's somewhere in the Northwest around Seattle, that would look like a good one, where they actually run you through scenarios of being kidnapped and what you can do. And it's a mock setup, but when you go through the class, like, all right, this is where we kidnap you. They grab you, bag you, throw you like in the trunk of a car, teach you how to get out of that and signal people. They do different things like that. They do exist. It's a question of who teaches them. I found a class on a guy who focused heavily on prepping, but he does a lot on situational awareness, surveillance detection. He's a former Delta guy. That's all I remember. I don't remember much about it. I'll have to look him up. I've never taken any civilian classes for any of that stuff, so I can't really speak to it. I would look heavily at who the instructors are and what their training are or is. My speech thingy. Let's see. I'm sorry if you're all complaining about the camera, but I'm not going to do anything about it right now.
What's wrong with the camera?
I guess I'm not centered enough, or they want it tilted up.
What? Oh, maybe, yeah. Tilt it up. Don't worry.
I can zoom out a little bit if you think it's too low, but that's about all I'm going to do.
Now the glare's too much. Just kidding.
Hey, Luke, check the internal.
Yeah, I seen it.
Am I right?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Okay.
Oh, see, now I got to go read it. Oh, on that individual. All right, let's see. Oh, let's see. I'm scrolling through all your comments right now, looking for questions. The band is back together. Oh, there was the question, the one you answered. I'm willing to bet that took him about 2 or 3 minutes at most. Gray and beige clothing is best in built-up areas. I suppose as a starting point. I look at built up as many things, but say a town to a city. The first thing I tell people is your environment. And I always try to explain it because they think like trees and stuff because you say the word environment. What are people wearing? What are they wearing at certain times of day? You know, you get down on Manhattan, people are wearing expensive outfits and suits. So I'm wearing kind of beige right now. I would stand out. It's a good general starting point for neutral colors, but don't think of neutral colors like the neutral palette when you're painting a house. Think of neutral colors as what is the neutral color scheme, and what is the neutral color scheme of that area. What do people tend to wear? Or what are they wearing at that event? What are they wearing at that location? You know, what are they wearing at the grocery store? Look at it like that.
Yeah, wearing a hoodie, a backpack, and some khaki pants and some boots is probably not going to go over well at a rodeo.
It'll go over great at a protest. You look like Antifa.
Yeah, I don't even think, a lot of the time it's really not even something to overthink. It's just like, where are you going? Where do you expect to go? And that's it. Like, if you're gonna go to, I don't know if you guys know where Niagara Falls is, whether it's Buffalo or whether it's Canada side, doesn't really matter. But if you're going to go to Niagara Falls and you're just like a tourist, you're probably going to blend in quite well, right? If you go down, well, look, it's even as back when I was a youngster, right? I started off my law enforcement career, I suppose, I started off in loss prevention. So when you see an individual coming to the, department store or whatever the case is, or a grocery store, and they're wearing a great big bulky jacket in this middle of summer, they stand out, right? You don't need a lot of expertise to understand that, right? So a lot of it is just basically, it's like, just dress appropriately, right? Act appropriately. It's not even about what you're dressed like. It could be even your accent that could make you stand out, especially if you're going to be talking to individuals. If you go to a small town or a small place, the vehicle you're driving, the plates on the vehicle, anything like that, your accent could have you stand out in a heartbeat. Well, you're not from around here. You know what I mean? Like, I know that you're not from around because that grocery store owner knows everybody that's there. So there's just a lot of different things to consider, but almost a good common sense should prevail. Isn't it common sense? I don't know. Maybe it's because, maybe it's not. I don't know.
You know what the rule is about common sense is, right?
Yeah, no, I get that. But
Not all that common.
It's not all that common, right? But look at it a common sense approach. Just a little bit of foresight, as to where you're going, where you're expected to go, and so on and so forth. And it may be even a little bit more difficult for others, right? If you go to Shammer goes to China, right? Or maybe it's not China, and I'm probably being biased here a little bit, but if you go to some place where everybody's short, you're going to try to stand, you know what I mean, or not stand out, or even David, for instance, you know what I mean? These are tall guys. You're going to stand out. You know what I mean? It's like, where's the bald white guy? You know what I mean? With a bunch of Asian-looking people. Well, there he is, right there. He stands out because it's the tallest one in the crowd. So is it? Well, it may not be possible in some applications. So that's it.
See, that's why I don't mind the mask mandates.
To me,
put on a hat, put on my mask. I'm like, hey.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's great because I'm in a uniform every day in my job, and it's been great with the masks. I got a black mask on, and now I feel like I'm always undercover, so to speak. But I'm not, of course. I'm in a uniform, but it's kind of funny. But they don't know who I am, so when I go to a grocery store, giving somebody a citation, they don't come back and give me a lip when I get another grocery store because they don't know who I am, which is really good. But anyway,
yeah,
a bit of an upside.
Real talk asked, are you more of a guru than an average person? I assume this is for me. Most of the things I talk about on here, as do the Grayman stuff, I'd be an expert. I'm a trained professional expert. I've done all this stuff. There are a few things I would willingly admit I'm more of a guru on that I haven't done a lot of. For example, I would say I'm a guru on surveillance. I know how to do it. It's not something I would say I'm an expert in. I don't even teach it all that much. I teach more surveillance detection, whether professionally or just at home stuff. But most things that would fall under the umbrella of human intelligence, or what we'd call a gray man, I'm absolutely an expert, especially when it comes to things like building rapport, body language, detecting deception, those types of things.
But there's also different subsettings too, right? So, I mean, like in surveillance, you could be talking about like what a PI does, where private investigator is going to go and they're going to stake a place out and they're looking at somebody and they're looking at the behaviors. There's that type of surveillance. And then there's CCTV type surveillance. And then there's digital surveillance. There's all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot to consider in a question like that. And of course, various degrees of expertise in each one of those too. So, I mean, give yourself a little bit of credit there because,
well, I'll give myself some credit. I look up this stuff all the time. There's plenty of people that do what I do, and I look for ideas or subjects to talk about. And so what I did I was telling David this, I think Luke too, a couple months ago, I looked up Grayman concept, Grayman hiding in plain sight. I did another web search to see if there's anything new because I hadn't really seen much. I did it at the end of the year. And I found 3 websites that had, 2 of them had an article, one of them had 3 articles they wrote. I had to check the dates on each one. Everything in there came from a podcast I had done a week prior. So there's 3 different people out there that were taking the stuff I do and putting it on their websites. Now, I'm not mad about that. I just wish they would have listened better. It was very clear it came from me. They even used some of the ways I talk about things. One of them was pretty terrible, like they didn't understand it at all. But I watch YouTube channels and stuff when guys have to do with reading body language, detecting deception, social engineering, all that kind of stuff, just those subjects, or surveillance detection, all these types of things. Some of these guys have some big YouTube channels too, millions of followers, hundreds of thousands of followers. And I watch their stuff, and sometimes one I was watching today, actually, I was watching the guys like, everything you're saying is correct, but you just missed like 10 things. Like, well, maybe that's what he's doing for the show. So I kind of let that go. Then some of the stuff he did, I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, I could have built an entire YouTube channel around that. I haven't seen anybody that's as good as I am. And that's not to toot my own horn, but I've seen guys that are really good. I got paid to do it for the government, teaching people how to do it and doing it. Like, when they interview people for any job in special operations, they go through a process like this. And we were lucky enough to have somebody like me in a place where we brought that in. Because I was there, it wasn't just detecting deception. We identified people where if you saw the interview, you'd have no idea. I'd have to explain it to you. I was like, this guy's got a drinking problem. This guy's homicidal. This guy's suicidal. Like, figuring stuff like that out just from reading their body language and asking them a few questions that are completely unrelated. This guy's a security risk. Those types of things I was able to figure out. So I am really good at it. But there are several people out there who do really well. Let's see. Jordy. I actually took a shower before I did the show, so I don't have anything on me. If I did a pocket dump for an everyday carry, I've done shows on everyday carry. When I do them, I know it sounds like I keep plugging my podcast. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to give people places to get information. I've done a couple podcasts on everyday carry, and what I try to do is focus on things people don't normally think about. Like, I don't do a pocket dump, or I don't talk about why you should have a knife or why you should wear a watch necessarily, but I pick things people don't normally think about, like putting money in their shoe, for example. Little simple things. If I showed you my everyday carry, my desk I'm sitting at now is probably 4.5 feet wide, 2.5 feet deep. I could cover the whole desk. I don't carry all of it all the time, but it's the options that I have. Like, I have 2 different primary knives if I choose to carry a knife. I have 3 different pens. I have 2 watches. I have 1 wallet if I choose to carry a wallet. Denominations of money. Certain types of plastic cards I'll carry for certain reasons. My key rings come apart in different pieces depending on what I need, as well as any other item you can think of. It just boils down to what people think they need. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. If I had my key ring, I should show you some stuff on there I think is cool that I use. So it's, I don't know what these guys carry every day. I imagine like Luke's probably the kind of guy that carries a knife all the time. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I don't always carry a gun. I do sometimes. I follow a 30-foot rule, and it's not the one people think. I am almost never more than 30 feet from a firearm for very specific reasons. There's times I clearly am, you know, like if I go in the post office, the bank, I'm more than 30 feet from a firearm, but you can't go anywhere on my house and you probably can't go anywhere in my house except for one place and be outside of 20 feet of a firearm. You just wouldn't know it. Like, I have knives all over my house. Probably sounds weird to some people, but yeah, I can't do one right now because I don't have anything on me. This is my current EDC item. It's my little Army Man bottle opener for my beer. I keep that close to me all the time for a good dunkel.
Considering I'm in a uniform every day, it's my everyday carry. Well, there's a duty belt, so it's got everything on it that I need in a day, pretty much. There's an Alexei knife there, certainly, or there's a Leatherman on it. You're right. I also have another knife there. Well, 2 knives, I guess. There's also one in my vest, but if I'm not, then yeah, I usually have a flip knife of some sort, pretty much always. And again, that's only because of the fact is, I guess, being an emergency responder, being trained emergency responder, I've come across, there was once that I didn't have a knife, and I came across this serious MVC, or motor vehicle collision, where there was a person that was trapped. And fortunately, that individual couldn't get him out of their seatbelt, and it was a fail. It was a fail on my part, and I made a conscious effort to understand that that wasn't ever going to happen again. Right? So it's just something that simple. Plethora of different reasons why you would carry a knife. And it doesn't have to be some fancy, knife. It can just be a simple Swiss Army knife in your pocket, and you'll find all kinds of uses for that. And I think it would behoove everybody certainly to do just that, but also understanding that you should be able to come up with things on the fly, adapt, improvise, and overcome. Right? So be able to improvise on just about anything that's going on around you, being able to utilize anything, even as a defensive weapon, if you needed to. Being able to get yourself out of that mindset and being able to quickly react to something and use whatever, whether it's an ashtray, whether it's remote control, something you can throw, a can of soup, you know what I mean? Whatever the case is. But it's critical thinking. And so if people want to look at things, critically think. And I was talking to Shamer earlier, I was maybe earlier today, talking about getting into a habit of believing in talking and thinking about, in talking with your family about the what ifs, right? And talking about that, even if you're driving, what if, leaving yourself an exit when you're driving. Tailgating is not just rude, it's a bad habit. It also gives you no room for error, right? But it also gives you room for escape. If you're at a traffic light or whatever the case is, law enforcement officers were actually trained to leave good room to actually do a turn and reverse and get out of that area. Now that could be for a defensive tactic. That could be certainly to be able to respond in the opposite direction that you're, facing or traveling at that time. So, and the other thing, of course, is you want to be able to see the entire back end of the vehicle that might be in front of it. So that'd be it. Viborg. There's the name of it.
The other thing too, like you mentioned, a pocket dump. One thing I don't think some guys do. Some people don't explain it very well. When they talk EDC, they talk like it's what's on your person all the time, and that's not the case. Like if you have a job and you carry a briefcase, you have the same stuff in your briefcase. That's everyday carry. It's just not on your person. So, for example, like I've talked about this before. People have heard of like lines of gear. They usually think tactical gear, first line, second line. It was developed in Vietnam, I think, by special forces guys or regular military guys. Their first line of gear was on their person all the time. So if they were in a shower, it was with their clothes in arm's reach. And they would carry like a compass and a notebook, a few basic things. Second line of gear was the main stuff, their tactical gear they would wear to go fight the war. And then the third line of gear was extra mission essential items and comfort items, essentially. I follow that same premise. If you label it like that, my first line of gear is whatever I'm carrying on me. That's on my person. My second line is a bag, and I carry 2 bags. I have a backpack that stays in my car that doubles as a get-home bag with some backup extra items, and also has even some hygiene stuff in there. And then I carry a messenger type bag. Like if you met my mom, she would know exactly what it is because I carry it with me all the time. And normally I pull out a notebook and my laptop out of there, but I have several other things in there. Like a firearm, for example, is always in there, first aid kit, an IFAK, essentially, a few other things. I can take that with me. If I'm going to a place where, like, say I'm carrying a gun, I can't carry a gun in there. I take my gun out, it goes in that bag. And then your third line of gear for me is the extra stuff I have available. Typically, it's going to be in a vehicle because if I'm at home, it's always here. So just remember that everyday carry goes beyond just what you're carrying on you. It could be in a bag, in a box, could be those extra things. So if you're a person that's getting into it and you're realizing I like all this stuff, I want to have all this stuff around, figure out what you need all the time because all of a sudden it can be too much. Put those extra items in some sort of bag. Oh, look at that. Is that Grassy No Club? That used to be my favorite show on YouTube. I used to watch all of his shows. And his videos are gone now. He used to talk about a lot of stuff. A furry convention. Nice. Well, Grassy, I guess it would depend on what you'd look best in and what you plan on doing as a furry. Which team member are you?
My EDC changes from day to day. It's always different. I don't know. I don't know why that is. I think a lot of it has to do kind of with maybe what I'm doing or what I'm expecting to do. If I'm unsure of how it's going to go, I will usually add to it. But if it's just fairly simple, if it's a trip, if it's, John across town or something like that, I mean, it's just very different. If I'm going to be gone for the day, if I'm going to be at the office or whatever, there's more to it. Today, nothing big. I mean, I always carry, one of the things I always carry is it's a Schrade Extreme. That's with me at all times, pretty much. My firearms often change depending on what I'm doing. So sometimes I'll have the smaller ones versus the bigger ones. There's always something.
Sometimes you just got to carry that sawed off in your appendix holster,
right?
especially when you're picking up chicks.
Yeah, Is that a sawed off in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me kind of a thing?
One of the things I have that is actually daily, especially when I travel, is I have an ankle holster, but it's not for a gun. What I keep in there is a knife and a tourniquet. And then it has a patch on there with my blood type. And I carry that all the time. And I especially carry it when I visit my family, when I'm around my mom. And if I'm at her house and we're not going anywhere, it sits on a table where I can get to it because she's on blood thinners. So if she gets a little paper cut, it takes some effort. It's not going to kill her, but it takes some effort to stop the blood flow. It's almost like she's a hemophiliac. But if I'm there and an accident was to happen and she got a good cut on her hand, a tourniquet would go on. And tourniquets are, when I tell people about medical devices and they want to learn about medical stuff and first aid, all that stuff's good to know. But the first real device you want to learn how to use is a tourniquet because they will save lives. In fact, there's a guy out there, a former Special Forces guy named Mike Glover, who runs Fieldcraft Survival and American Contingency. He developed a better IFAC, especially for a vehicle, and has multiple tourniquets in it. And the reason is he tells this story, but what I remember, the gist of it is a guy he knows in the community was in a car wreck, and Mike was there and saw it and put tourniquets on him. And he had one, maybe two with him, but the situation required more tourniquets and he didn't have them. And medical help didn't arrive in time and the guy died and really affected him. It's like in the military, when guys carry IFACs, regular military guys, there's one tourniquet in there. And that usually suffices. But you meet somebody in special forces, they're going to tell you they carry 4 or 5 on them all the time. I carried 2 or 3 when I was deployed. I didn't learn until later. Like in my car right now, I'd carry the one on my ankle. I have a hip kit I can use that has 1 tourniquet in there. I have 2 in a bag. I have an unopened sterile IFAC with another one in there. So I have at least 5 in my car all the time that I can get to.
Like Shammer froze up.
Did I? No, I'm reading. Rudy, I am not sure what that question means. Go to surveil a person. What agency? In the UK, MI5.
Medical profession. So what agency in the UK would which agency would use a medical profession to surveil a person?
Anybody could, but the way their security services work, MI5 focuses on internal security. That'd be my first answer, is more likely be MI5 because they'd be doing it inside the country. MI6 could do it as well as some others. But that'd be MI5. A lot of people have heard of MI6. For those that are interested on intelligence agencies, I probably should do a show on all kinds of agencies. Look up MI5 and see who they are and what they do and compare them to MI6. All major countries and a lot of smaller ones too that have intelligence agencies have similar ones to ours and some that are different. Just like in the military, it's vastly different. In the Marine Corps, human intelligence, counterintelligence, same job. In the Army, it's 2 separate jobs.
But we have at least 18 different agencies here in the United States.
19.
Is it 19 now? Okay.
It's been 19. You just can't find a couple of them, but there's 19.
Does that include the Space Force?
They will eventually. So they're, well, no, that would actually make it 20. They're now part of the intelligence community. That would make it 20. And that actually made sense. I expected that to happen.
Yeah, I think it already did.
I think it already did, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It was just something when they created it, my first thought was that will be in the intelligence community as part of the DoD. It's like most of the intelligence community,
Space Force.
50-60% of the agencies belong to the Department of Defense. They're not, and only 2 of them are independent. But for people who are interested in why they'd be considered part of the intelligence community or became part of the intelligence community, is the National Reconnaissance Office is the intelligence agency that has all the spy satellites, and they build them themselves. They have to send them up through NASA, and there's a documentary on it. It's been a huge problem. Space Force will be flying to space using space shuttles and, you know, starships eventually, I suppose. It will make it easier being an intelligence agency and all those guys with clearances and within not only the intel community, but the military, for them to launch the NRO satellites. That's the primary function of why they're going to be in the intel community. Let's see. What about probing, solicitation? How do you know if it's harmless or if it is targeted?
When it doesn't hurt.
Yeah. It's like that shirt, you know, they have the shirts, ask me about this. Some are funny, some are serious. Ask me about this. And then there's one that shows a spaceship and it's like beaming a guy up and it says, ask me about my butthole. I think that's hilarious. Well, this could go either way, whether it's you getting information or somebody getting it from you. If it starts to feel weird, go with the feeling. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Some people are nosy or just invasive. You know, they don't have boundaries. But that's a general safe bet. If it's a pro, especially if they're really good at it, you're not going to know. I've talked about elicitation, not solicitation. Elicitation is when you get information from people and they don't know what you're after. And if you can especially make them think you're after something else or you're just doing something else, then you can get it more easily. That's what I do. It's one of the things I did when we work with assets and sources, is elicitation of information. But odds are you're not going to run into a pro. But I used to do it to these guys all the time. Or I remember, might have been David, people would want to get off, like, hey, I need to get off. And then I would just keep talking away and I'd be like, hey, just so you know, it's been 30 minutes. And I would keep them on just through conversation. But go with the gut.
Do it to me all the time.
Yeah, just like that naval attack in the Pacific.
You dicks. Seriously. Yeah. Well, while we're talking about being a gullible Canadian, I'm going to answer Alex there real quick. He's got a question for myself there in the process of getting a concealed permit. Number one, for transparency purposes, I'm the only Canadian in the panel, and I'm proud to be that. I say that lightly. Look, while I can't talk about the concealed permit, we don't have that option up here. We don't have a Second Amendment right up here in our Constitution or our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So we're the underdog when it comes to that. So I'll push that question over to those guys. But what I will tell you is this, and I've always said this. So understanding you're getting a concealed permit, so you're understanding you're carrying concealed. So that's it. You know, do you want people to know that you have that or not? Practice. You know what I mean? Actually getting it out of your concealed area to utilize it. Understand that you are going to utilize that. Be prepared to utilize it, and the onslaught of what that means. If you are going to engage in somebody, understand what your rights are. Don't talk to the police. Even if the officer or the detective sits there and says, hey, Alex, looks like a clean shoot. You know what? I just need you to come down to the station real quick, answer a couple quick questions. I'll be able to get your firearm back to you and stuff like that. And you be a dummy and go down there and do that. Don't do that. Okay. So that'd be the other one. The other thing is that practice, right? Because when you're under duress and you're not expecting it, you want to make sure that you're landing those rounds. That's the whole reason you're carrying it, right? Or the deterrence, but understanding what it is. So good habits, well, that's just it. Understanding that, hey, the whole reason you're carrying this thing is that you're going to try to protect yourself for the life of another, right? Or to deter that attack, right? Again, it's concealed. So the only time that's going to happen is if you deploy it. So that's just it. And understanding what your rights are. Understanding, go back and read actual case law. How did it work out for the last guy that did that? Understanding what to do, what not to do. At the end of the day, right? We always say it in law enforcement. I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. So you might not care, but don't get yourself into more trouble than what it's worth. At the end of the day, whether it was a good shoot or not, do the right thing and get a lawyer and expect it to be a long, drawn-out process. That's just it. And the other thing is that understand what the laws are in your particular state or county or whatever the case is, and who you want to talk to. These guys will be able to tell you a bit more about actually carrying, because they do it, as a civilian on a daily, right? Or if not always, periodically. So that's my input there.
I would say that, like, regardless of your experience, for anybody, you need to know how to operate that firearm. You need to understand the types of ammo you need and why. Shooting at a range is good, but get training from a professional about realistic situations in using a firearm. If you just go to a range and practice shooting 2 in the chest and 1 in the head, and then you have to shoot somebody, you're going to end up doing that. And then you might have done the right thing to save a life, but you might have been in jail too. So you need to know how to use it effectively. You need to get trained and practice on how to remove it from the holster properly. You need to think about, do I have a heavy coat, a light jacket, a t-shirt hanging over it? How do I move that clothing effectively to get to the firearm? You need to make sure that however you're going to store it, it's done safely, and that anybody that's going to be around it, there's all kinds of stuff on that, but whatever you need to do in that arena to make sure other people are educated. If it's a first firearm, spend time, more than one time, going to stores and putting them in your hand and make sure they're comfortable. Don't buy things because it's popular. Don't buy something because somebody says, well, your hand's this size, this is the gun you need. You might need a gun that size, but you don't necessarily need that make and model. It's like Glocks. Glocks are one of the best firearms you can get. I don't own a Glock. I don't like Glocks. They don't work for me. They're not comfortable to me. I can shoot them just fine, but I don't own them. I carry SIGs and H&K firearms. That's me. But it should be comfortable. It should fit well. Don't buy a caliber of bullet because of what people say. Buy a caliber you can handle. You can get a full size or a compact firearm all day long. They're going to come in multiple calibers. There's a difference between shooting a 380 and a 45, or a 357 SIG, or a 9mm or 10mm.
Or a DE50. I think everybody should carry that, especially if you're under 5 foot tall.
Or a 500 Smith & Wesson with an 8-inch barrel and a compensator on it, whatever works. But you need to be able to place the shot. You don't want to have too much firearm. And let's say, legal situation, you're going to shoot somebody in the chest. That's the requirement. You can't handle the firearm properly and you end up killing them. Or I'm not going to go much further on where to shoot people. That's probably a bad idea. But you need to make sure that, I think you have a response. My opinion is you have a responsibility to know your laws, to know your rights, and to know how to safely and effectively use that tool if the time comes.
Yeah, well, to add to that, and I've talked about this in active shooter scenarios. A mall's a really good example of this. There's guys out there basically that fantasize about this in their head. And fantasizing about something is not necessarily a bad thing, right? And I'm saying this there's probably 2 different ways of looking at it, about fantasizing about something like that. But keeping in mind that you're thinking this all the way through, right? Because let's just say an active shooter situation and you're carrying a shield, and now you have basically you're free to go to go ahead and and engage that particular threat. The problem is that you could be perceived as the threat, especially in that scenario. So really, really thinking about these things through. So while you're fantasizing about that, really understand what that may entail. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, and sometimes in a situation like that, it's not necessarily the idea that, hey, I can engage, maybe try not to engage, understanding concealment and cover, and basically trying to disengage that threat and get away, right? So you don't even have to go down that road. And again, situational awareness. Don't put yourself in that situation. If you see somebody shady by an ATM machine, well, I'm 10 foot tall now, I'm bulletproof because I'm carrying a Glock. Well, that's not a good way of looking at it, right? So the mindset is huge, right? Even law enforcement officers were trained to do that. It's just the idea is that we're supposed to engage a dangerous threat. The idea is to do that tactfully, right? And so it doesn't have to be necessarily just law enforcement. It should be on a civilian application as well, right? So it is really important.
Oh, see, I just purchased a home surveillance cameras, not through a subscription. That's good. Hooked up to internet, just monitor how safe. So being hooked up to the internet, like anything, it could be hacked into. So you want to make sure that you understand the security, you have a good firewall, and you're aware of that. If they're wireless, they're far more dangerous. I tell people all the time, I do not ever recommend wireless cameras. If you're comfortable with that, that's okay. It just depends on what you want. Hardwired systems are going to be better. No matter what you have, hopefully you have or can eventually get to where it records to something in case it's ever needed, especially to a physical hard drive in your house, not just in the cloud. Like anything, if it's in the cloud, it's on the internet, it can be hacked into. Will people? Probably not. People that try to do that, whether it's for fun or malicious reasons, tend to go for wireless devices. It's like the Ring camera. One of the most unsafe devices out there. A year or two ago, there's a whole thing on guys, sitting wherever, hacking into Ring cameras in other states and talking to people inside their house, messing with kids, doing some pretty mean or funny stuff in some cases. So wireless is not the best plan. No matter what you have, you want to make sure you have a good security system and firewalls built in. I would consider, if you did it yourself, some sort of consultation from a company, a reputable large company that does security installs and understands the security systems and how they work, or an independent contractor. There's plenty out there. Even if you can find somebody that is a computer pro, a web designer, somebody who does security on the internet for internal or external security systems and internets at companies. They don't need to understand surveillance. They understand internet security. So those are the things to look into.
Okay, so if you're interested in the secure part, if you have something on the internet, or if you have anything that you need, that first of all, make it password protected. That's first and foremost. Make sure your password has at least 10 characters. Make it numbers, upper and lowercase letters and symbols. But I stress no less than 10. And preferably upwards of 18 characters. If you have that, and I'm talking about randomness, not a sentence, not your kid's name, nothing that includes whatever. I mean, a random thing that maybe only means something to you or means nothing to nobody, right? Numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase, with symbols, no less than 10 characters, upwards of 18. By doing it that way, the average hacker, it's going to take them about 5 years to get on that 10 level, right? But to kind of give you an idea, it would take, let's see, if you had 13 characters, the way that I'm describing, it'd take about 2 million years to hack it using standard hacker tech. So, but again, it's the way that I describe that. If you, the more common it becomes, the easier it is to do. And even the most complex variations, if it is something common to something personal, while it may take a couple of weeks to do it, it can be done.
And if you're going to make it that long, don't use a pattern on your keyboard. Learn it. So what I mean is, if for those that are at a computer, or next time you're at a computer, when you're looking at your keyboard, you got your numbers across the top and letters across the bottom. I saw this all the time in the military. I have to read it to see it. But if you look at it, you could go 1Q, 2W, 3E, then you could hold down the shift key and repeat, and you meet all the requirements. That's a known established pattern. Don't do that.
Right.
Let's see. Oh, easy question. Grayman practices in hot and tropical environment. No different than anywhere else. Yeah, you're going to have to wear different clothing, just like you would if you're in the Arctic. Granted, if you're in the Arctic, there's less people, but the principles are the same. You just have to apply them to your environment, both the environment, the physical environment like tropics, or whether you're in a city or wherever you're at. The principles are the same. Why the space race to Mars? Not really a Grayman topic. My general understanding, part of the reason to get a space race to Mars and get back on the moon is to find resources so that we can quit destroying the Earth. There are people that are looking at it that way. what resources could we eventually mine, just like you see in the movies. I'm sure there's many other reasons.
It's also probably naturally, as far as natural resources, I'm sure it is filled to the brim with natural resources that can be exploited. There is a lot of money under the surface there. I am convinced of it. So, yeah.
Department of Homeland Security peeping while you're sleeping. Half true. The second half's true. Wrong department. There's plenty of people that can do it. They have some intelligence assets, but that's not what they do.
Oh, they've got programs, actually, just so you're aware that they compile every digital footprint that you have, period, and it just gets stored. Okay. So it goes into a database and it gets stored. Now, no one's looking at it right now, right? But like the transactions and the people you talk to and, you know, where you went and the plane ticket you have and the movie you watched and the thing that you downloaded, it's all getting stored. It's all on you. It's all about you. And then let's say something happens and you're involved in something. That's when they're going to get a warrant to go into that database to pull that information and then evaluate you to build a profile. Or to be a little bit more specific about that, actually, that program is building a profile, but then they'll be able to look at it and put some human eyes on it and act accordingly from there. So, yeah, they are watching.
Thanks, Jordy. You have contributed to my toy fund that I already bought my toys. Like my new camera and this big microphone. Thank you very much. Let's see. Grumpy Gardner from Locals, what would be a good egress plan in case one were caught in a rapid developing street riot or caught in crowds? I did an entire podcast on that last year.
Spray
and pray.
Spray and pray. The first rule of thumb is to not put yourself there. So if you project that that's going to be it, don't put yourself there. Don't be one of those people. Hey, man, look, protesting, you know what I mean, it's your right. I mean, that's it. But I just say don't put yourself there. And my last thing, I'll hand this over to Shammer because certainly he did a whole podcast on it. Get to the outside edge. Don't be center mass. Get to the outside edge.
Yeah, don't be in the middle. One of the things I look for anywhere I go, even if I went to a park, is evacuation routes, places I can leave. I go to a restaurant, I look for other options in the front door. Sometimes I even look at their windows. If I sit by a window, I'm like, can I get a chair through this window? I've done that. But I always look and try to identify ways to get away. I also look for other safe locations that might be there. If it's, say, you're at a festival, something like that. One of the things I look for, any law enforcement, quick way to do it, find the beer garden. A lot of times you go to an event or a concert or an event in your park and they have a beer garden. Typically there'll be cops close by. So that's one of the things I look for, law enforcement. Only because if somebody does a bunch of stupid stuff, they're not going to want to be around the cops. And granted, the cops might go to where they're at, but that's one possible safe location. But always look for those evacuation routes. The other thing too is don't get involved unless you're doing it as a short-term cover. Where if people are angry and emotional and they try to engage in conversation and scream in your face, try as best you can to figure out what's going on, to try to say to them something to make them think you're in support of what they're doing, and then they'll usually back off. But yeah, the biggest thing is knowing to the best of your ability when could it happen, what will happen. But I did a whole show on it based on the premise of being like in a restaurant or a store, and then the protest is coming and the riot's probably going to break out. How do I get out of there? Always have cash on you, small bills, 20s, 5s and 20s are most common. At least have 20s. Keep them in different pockets. That way, if you get attacked or get mugged, you got something to give them. You know, have things to get you out of situations or trade. What are you laughing about?
I don't know. I feel so silly because you were like, keep cash on you. And the first thing that went to my mind is if you don't have cash, then you have your EDCs. Make sure you get some from the person closest to you.
Yeah. Yeah, know where transit locations are if you need to get away. Like whenever I go to Seattle, when I'm back home, if I go up there, I actually usually have coins. I haven't been there in Seattle in a while, but they used to always take coins, and I would carry a few dollars in coins on me in case I needed to get on a bus to get away. If you're somewhere with several people and you have the ability
Yeah,
to take what? Go ahead. Okay. If you're going somewhere with people and you have the ability to take more than one vehicle, don't park them together. Park them in two different locations. That way you can meet up, and then if something was to happen, you have two other options. You have two ways you can go to get to a vehicle to get away. That's another thing that I do. And there's 1,000 things you can do, but those are a few tips.
There's a couple of professions that you can start to study too. I mean, even people in close protection, for instance, right? So when you're in close protection, you're going to go to do a pre-assessment or an advance, certainly on a particular site. You know what I mean? Something like that was a good idea. So where are the motels and so on and so forth that that you could be staying at, so that you can get back out of there if you got sprayed, for instance. Being prepared for these little type of things, being able to anticipate what could happen, so you can prepare and hedge against that, right? The idea of not putting yourself there to begin with, right? And try to have that foresight, looking ahead and saying, hey, I can see this starting to develop, start to take, evasive action before it becomes a problem. That's it, and being disciplined in that, and that's a lot of the time. I mean, that's a lot about prepping, for instance. I mean, you talk about anybody who's a prepper or anything of that nature. It's about taking evasive action, doing something in foresight, say, well, what could happen? What's most probable? And preparing for that, right? And a lot of that is just not putting yourself there. Coming back to the situation of carrying, you know what I mean? The idea is that you never want to deploy that firearm for that purpose. So increase your probabilities not having to do that by not putting yourself in that situation. So
Here's a good one from Double B. Advice on Grayman traveling cross country in COVID times. I have done this a couple of times. First thing is, and you may have to do it day by day, find out what the state's doing. Is everything shut down, or is there mandatory mask requirements? You get near smaller towns, it can be hard, but major cities you can look up, find out what their mask requirements are and whatever they're saying about that. I've gone to places and they've had mask requirements, and I'm like, nobody's wearing a mask here, so I don't. And I don't wear a mask almost ever. The masks I carry with me are the medical masks for surgeries. What I'd like to call the second most worthless mask. I keep those on me because they're the most common. I have a box of them, and I keep a few in my vehicle. That way I have a mask available. So I have those. Know what's going on. Plan your route according to that, because I've been one of the places I went to get gas. They would like freak out if you got out of the gas pump by yourself and didn't have a mask on. So I was paying attention to that stuff to make sure that I didn't have attention drawn to me. It's not a big of a deal right now, but if we get another wave, it could be just like it was last year, where they start having checkpoints going in and out of states, checking to see where you're coming from. Make sure you know, based on where you're going and where you're coming from, what are the quarantine times, if there is a checkpoint, who are they turning around. Make sure you have an answer. Like one of the things I did, one of the states I went through, I made hotel reservations that I could cancel in plenty of time just to prove I had hotel reservations. And I had a prepared story of who I was going to see there. Or I was just, actually my prepared story was I was looking for places to live. So I was going to be in Salt Lake City for up to 2 weeks, researching places to live. And then when I met quarantine, start looking at places. That was a prepared story. And then I just canceled the reservations in time. Those are really the biggest things. Everything else is just the same. Just pay attention to what people are doing. Biggest thing, especially if you're actually worried about COVID, standard stuff, staying clean. If you're driving straight through, have the hand sanitizer. Pay attention to what people are doing in stores. I mean, I've been in places where nobody cares about the 6-foot rule, and I've been in places where they feel like you need to be 10 feet away no matter where you're at a gas station, making it impossible to move. So pay attention to that kind of stuff. So that was good. Any other questions out there?
Here's another, just a cool little security tip. Anytime you can get a two-factor authentication on your digital stuff, that's a good idea. Actually, it's interesting. Google has an authenticator that's actually pretty decent, but there are other things that you can do for measures. I saw there was a, and that's what made me think of that. MCon Black put this comment in the chat there, talking about a nitro key generating passwords and stuff like that. The more levels of security that you can put between you and somebody else on digitally is a good idea. I think that, for instance, there are times where you can sense that somebody is on your computer. This has happened to me in the past. I've been able to build up my security accordingly, but like all of a sudden, everything on my computer really started to slow down. And it took me a minute to figure out that I was under attack. And thankfully, most of my stuff was on an external, and I was able to save my stuff while also handling the situation because of the complexity of how I had everything. So, it adds a level of, buffer. So just anything that you can do, I think, is more than nothing, which is always going to be a benefit.
Well, a lot of places now require you to do two-factor authentication, and I get that it's inconvenient and eats up seconds of your time, but if the company wants you to have two-factor authentication, your first thought should be, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And it's not insurance purposes. They know what's going on.
I think it's awesome. I love the authenticators, because so for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, basically an authenticator, the code or the number system or whatever, it changes every minute, and so it's linked up. I mean, you have a minute to get all that stuff squared away, and then that's what makes it cool. It makes it even more difficult. I'm on at 135 said, I believe you had an issue during a live. Yeah, that's probably true.
I remember an issue I think Luke had on a live chat. That was adult featured.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was some alien porn or something like that. I took it up there. But that was because I was handing out the live link. So I was trying to encourage people with a lot of these chats, certainly, as most people I can understand, certainly if you're the first time ever to one of these chats here. So, certainly, number one, welcome to the show. But here's the other thing is that normally it's like-minded people. And certainly with Informed State of Mind, the idea was to try to get people that didn't necessarily have the same mindset or the same opinion or that weren't per se like-minded, had a different opinion. That was a goal. So I handed out basically a free link to get into the internal panel, which doesn't always work out well. So there you go. Got to be quick.
So this is going to be our last question. I was trying to keep this at 2 hours. Any advice for military members who've been becoming the target of the SecDef's weeding out of extremists? So I have strong opinions. Try to keep it nice. For one, this will go away. Just like sexual assault, rape, murders. I mean, when's the last time you heard about all that stuff in Texas? Just recently happened. It's going to go away. Being that it's extremism and everything happened politically because of an election year, it'll probably last a little longer, but it won't be there forever. If you're in the military, you're in the military. You got to do what you got to do there. They're doing a stand down. The thing is, when I looked in the stand down, they're only doing like 1 day of training. They're taking it about as seriously as they do sexual assault. It's political. There are people that care about this stuff and really want to see it change, but a lot of them, especially farther up you go the ladder, they don't care. They're doing this for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with taking care of soldiers. Just like recently, there was a TikTok thing. I saw it on Twitter. This female Marine came out crying, and it was about, I don't remember the gist of it, but she was sexually assaulted and somebody admitted it, and nothing was being done. it went viral because of TikTok. And then the Marine Corps was like, well, you know, we take all this stuff seriously. And I was like, I couldn't help myself. I was like, if you guys took this seriously, this video never would have been made. When this guy went public and admitted it, you would have done something about it. So in the grand scheme of things, I don't think they really care. That's just my opinion. So I want to thank everybody for joining. We're going to go off air. If you want to come on here and talk to us off air, let me know, and I'll see about possibly getting you a link to come in and chat with us. We'll probably be here for a little while. Make sure that you check everything out we've advertised, such as right here, David's podcast, The Disagreeable Thoughts and Philosophies, DMR Publications. He does it every Friday or Saturday. Well, he does on Friday, comes out on Saturday. And don't forget to also check out his website, dmrpublications.com. You can also find me. Me and David can be found on all the same podcast platforms, except for he's not on Pandora. So definitely check that out. One last time to make sure you give a comment, a thumbs up, especially after this post, if you want to be entered into this drawing, and I'll send you a copy of the definitive book of body language like I talked about at the beginning of the show. I'm going to be doing these at a minimum every month. I've committed to that. We'll be doing them again in a month, so make sure that you click the bell below, and when it drops down, click all, so that you get notified whenever we advertise and put up the next show. Don't forget to check out the Intel Training website. Thank you for joining, and we are going off air. I hope you all had a good time.